Shout out to everybody who saw my video I did this morning about Sampson Lekowicz's comments about how the rematch with Tszyu is the priority of Team Pandora. Shout out to you guys for liking and subscribing. Appreciate you guys. Glad you liked the content. And I wanted to talk about this interview where Sampson Lewkowicz explains why he changed his mind on the rematch, because I explained in other videos, just in case you haven't seen them, that originally when he was asked by the media, he said two things that stood out to me. One, that Tszyu will get the rematch but not next, and the other was, well, my job as a promoter is to get the biggest money fight, and we all know what that can mean. So I was a bit concerned at first, but then he changed his mind this morning, and he says the reason why he changed his mind is that he was initially quite upset with Tszyu because of this exchange they had the day of the press conference, where Tszyu walked up to him and said that he had been talking about him behind his back, talking shit about him, and when they left, when they went their separate ways, Tszyu called him a weasel. Now, I don't know what was said to set Tszyu off like that. He strikes me as a straight shooter, so I don't think he would be doing this to build a fight. I don't think it was to, again, sell wolf tickets or anything. I think there must have actually been something that pissed him off. Anyway, Sampson Lewkowicz says he was upset by those comments, so he didn't want to do Tszyu any favours, which I can understand. But then he says, nah, this isn't me, cooler heads prevailed, in other words, and let's get the rematch on. Now, as a boxing fan, I massively appreciate that. As I said this morning, I was stoked when I saw this news. So, yeah, that is his reason for changing his mind, and he does mention money, which isn't a bad thing at all, but you just don't want it to go in a certain direction. But what Lewkowicz said was that he and his team did not make the amount of money they felt they deserved to make, but they took it because of the opportunity. And this is very common in boxing, as we all know. B-sides often don't feel that they get what they deserve, but that is unfortunately how boxing works. So he is saying that the money does need to be right, and again, that in itself is no issue. Let's just hope they can sort things out. And I must say, Sampson Lewkowicz, I know a lot of people don't like him, particularly Canelo fans, but he does strike me as a guy who is being reasonable here. I mean, I've got a far better feeling listening to this guy talk than I do Bob Arum, let's just say that. I mean, you don't often know what Bob Arum is saying half the time. I don't even think Bob Arum knows what he's saying, but anyway, I'm getting off track here. I just feel that Lewkowicz is saying things which seem to be pointing in the right direction, which is a rematch with Tszyu happening. Now, I will say this. If they end up going with Terence Crawford, that is fine. And while I will be disappointed for Tszyu, because just to recap and explain to people who may disagree why I feel he deserves a rematch, Tszyu didn't have to take this fight. He was signed to fight Keith Thurman. Now, I said that fight is absolute garbage when it was signed. Again, as a massive fan of Tszyu, I said this fight is a complete waste of time. He took a late notice replacement who had far more to gain than him. He took it without blinking. He saved the show. He could have quit at any moment and said, look, I can't see, this is ridiculous, we've got to stop the fight, etc. And nobody would have judged him. And he did all of this after a year where he was the mandatory for the WBO, similar position to Terence Crawford. He was given an opportunity to fight for all the belts. Jermell Charlo pulled out. Tszyu took one of the toughest options he could have, which was Tony Harrison, earned an interim title, defended it, then had a chance to fight for the vacant title, and he fought the fastest rising contender aside from himself in Brian Mendoza. So he did heavy lifting last year. He was one of the fighters of the year, aside from the big name champions, for me last year. He did everything we want fighters to do. So to do this after that year, I'd say 100% he deserves a rematch. But I will say, Terence Crawford is deserving because he is pound for pound number one, and per the WBO rules, he is the mandatory. Now, it is a bit peculiar to me that a mandatory has been ordered on 2 consecutive years, one after the other, because usually, correct me if I'm wrong, any of you in the comment section, but don't sanctioning bodies have to wait at least a year and a half to order another mandatory, or am I missing something? But either way, Tszyu was the WBO mandatory last year, Terence Crawford's the WBO mandatory now. He does deserve it, but at the same time, as much as I love and respect Terence Crawford, fighters in other divisions don't have to set aside all of their plans for one fighter. I mean, no fighter is bigger than the sport, and Terence Crawford is definitely deserving of a big fight, but Tszyu, who has done heavy lifting in his own division and has earned this opportunity, he hasn't just been given it by, a weak mandatory status, which is what everyone accused him of last year. For me, he's also in the opportunity to take a fight and have a rematch after, like I said, everything he did last year and for this fight. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours down below about Sampson Lekowicz's comments. Again, there are, of course, a few things you hope aren't going to mean much in the future, but everything is pointing in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. So let me know what you guys think about everything I've talked about. Like the video and subscribe to the channel for more, as always.